Hello, welcome back to Dinosaurs. So today we're going to keep walking through Module 3, the Saurischian, and today we're going to talk about the basal Saurischian, so the very earliest forms in this group. And then we're going to go through some of the more advanced forms, some more derived forms, some of the more forms that we think about when we think about the large theropod dinosaurs like T-Rex. And then we're going to talk about some of the sauropods, like, say, Brachiosaurus, Apatosaurus, those things. But we're going to start with kind of things like this guy behind me here, a little bit not quite so intimidating. But before we do, some announcements, block it off on your calendar, know that that's happening and that that's coming. All right, so let's review what we talked about last time. So we talked about dinosaur hunters and kind of the history of hunting for dinosaurs, not literally shooting them, but trying to find the bones and trying to piece things together. So which of the following was not one of the originally described dinosaurs? So in 1841, when Richard Owen originally defined the Dinosauria, which one of these was not part of that? Okay, so Tyrannosaurus, it was not one of those. So Megalosaurus, the jawbone with kind of that one tooth, this very large extinct carnivorous lizard, and then Iguanodon, the very large extinct herbivorous lizard, and then Hylaeosaurus, kind of the first like armored extinct lizard. These are the three that he used to define it. Tyrannosaurus wasn't actually formally defined and described until 1902, so almost 60 years later. So whenever we think about dinosaurs, Tyrannosaurus is kind of the first one that jumps to a lot of people's mind. It was quite a while, 6 decades after we started studying these things before it was even discovered, and we're still kind of finding things out about it. So that's kind of both intimidating and kind of the cool part about this. It's evolving over time and changing over time, and we find new information every day, which in theory replaces outdated, older, not quite as good information. So which of the following was an unfortunate part of paleontology's past and present? So that progress was not linear, and it came at the expense of a lot of people's lives and careers, and just a lot of kind of negative things around there. So which of these unfortunate parts of paleontology's past? So give you some time. This is actually from an episode of Drunk History, if you guys are familiar with that show. So there we go. All of these are an unfortunate part of paleontology's past. And as we progress in the science, we're also trying to progress in dealing with these issues. And as indicated by the Brazilian fossil, we're not there yet. So the personal feuds, the bone wars, obviously North American paleontology suffered as a result of that. And a lot of finds might even have been destroyed as a result of that. A very unpleasant chapter in our history. The exporting of samples from countries that were colonies and brought back to the European or North American country for display there, where the natural resources were essentially stolen from the country of origin. This is still something that happens today. And then also, unfortunately, not sharing the expertise with the locals, so kind of just parachuting into these countries, digging up the resources, and just exporting them, and kind of not sharing any of the paleontological knowledge, not building a new generation of science in that country, and not kind of sharing expertise and building knowledge. And then there's also an unfortunate history of marginalization. You've seen a lot of these people were kind of Europeans, North Americans. In many cases, the locals were marginalized. Not a lot of women have been mentioned thus far, so women have been marginalized, although there have been some major contributions. We talked about Mary Anning when we're talking about ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, talked about Mary Ann Mantell, the diagram we're talking about, the early dinosaurs. So not very few examples, but not non-existent, and more so every day. So hopefully we're making progress on these issues, but we do need to talk about them. We do need to acknowledge them, and hopefully we can address them going forward, or at least attempt to address them going forward. All right, so let's talk about Saurischian. That's what we're here for. So we're going to talk about initially the basal Saurischian today, the kind of more primitive members of Saurischian. And then we're going to talk through some of the more derived members. So today we're going to be focusing on these. In the next couple lectures, we're going to be focusing on the true theropods. And these are what you think about when you think about the carnivorous dinosaurs and into the birds. Then we're going to transition over to here, the big old herbivorous sauropod dinosaurs. And then the ornithischians, the other side of the dinosaur tree, that's going to be all of module 4. So things like the stegosaurs and the ceratopsians, those are going to be in module 4. So we're going to talk about these today, Herrerasauria, Eodromaeus, and Tawa. And so let's get into it. But before we do, you're going to you've probably noticed that the suffixes on a lot of the words here have changed. So like, for example, occasionally I might say Tyrannosauroidea, I might say Tyrannosauridae, might say Tyrannosaurinae, might say Tyrannosaurus. Those things kind of change, and it's based on the rank, the cladistic rank, so where it sits in the tree. And so at each level down, you're kind of getting more and more specific, and each classification has its own suffix. In many cases, I might get a little bit lazy with getting these exact suffixes right. You'll notice that I have updated some of them occasionally in the notes. It's not super important, and I'm not going to test you on it, but just know that when you hear oidea versus ide versus ine, there are actual cladistic implications for that. It means something. So for example, talking about the human history, evolution of humans, hominoid is the hominoidea is the highest level, this is the super family. As we go away from that, it's less and less like humans. But hominoidea includes basically all human ancestors and all gorillas and all apes and all orangutans and all kinds of things that are very much kind of, not what we think of when we think of humans. So that's kind of the highest level. Hominoidea, here's Tyrannosauroidea, all of these are Tyrannosauroids. Going to the next level, Hominidae, that's now we've excluded these old world apes, and now we're into the new world apes, new world monkeys, I should say, gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans. Going down to the next level, homininae, now we're just to gorillas, basically humans, and chimpanzees. And then when we go down the next level, hominini, then it's humans and chimpanzees. And oftentimes you'll see chimpanzees pan broken off into their own tribe, panini. So each of these has its own kind of meaning, and I'll try to keep it consistent, but I'll probably mess up at times. But again, Tyrannosauroidea, kind of the highest level. All of these things are Tyrannosauroids. These are Tyrannosaurids, so getting more specific. These are Tyrannosaurines. And then there's only one genus, Tyrannosaurus, the actual animal itself, Tyrannosaurus rex, the species binomen, like we are Homo sapiens. So keep that in mind. You'll be seeing that a lot through the class. Again, I'm not going to test you on this. You don't need to know it, just so that you avoid being super confused, because it can be confusing jumping back and forth between these names. But just know that there are implications for it. And the higher up you go, the kind of like more broader you're talking about. And the lower on this list you go, the more specific you're talking about. So let's talk about the Herrerasauria. So these are very early basal Saurischians, and they're so basal that they're not specialized enough, they're not derived enough to fall into either the Sauropod group nor the Theropod group. This whole first part of the module is going to be talking about the Theropods, the predominantly carnivorous Saurischians. And then we're going to talk about the Sauropods, the primarily herbivorous Saurischians, at the end of the module. Herrerasauria don't fit in either of those. But these do include the oldest definitive dinosaurs. So there's track evidence There probably are older things that we'll eventually consider dinosaurs. There's a lot of things that kind of fall in and out of the classification, but these are the oldest definitive dinosaurs at 233 million years ago. So that's quite a while ago in the Triassic. They're mostly known from South America, particularly the Ischigualasto Formation. But these are also found in North America as some of the early migrants. So if we look at the paleogeography of what the Earth looks like in this early portion of the Triassic, I should say mid portion of the Triassic, we still have Pangea mostly assembled. North America is starting to rift off here. So the Atlantic is starting to open up. Dinosaurs, so like these dinosaurs, these very early dinosaurs, probably originated in southern Gondwana, this southern supercontinent, versus Laurentia, the northern supercontinent, all assembled to Pangea. But kind of the cradle of dinosaurs was probably either in South America, modern day South America, or in Africa, and the dinosaurs sort of radiated outwards from there. At this time, the land was connected enough that they could move, they could migrate out of the southern portions of the supercontinent Gondwana and into the northern portions of the supercontinent, and also into the eastern portions of the supercontinent. But as you saw earlier in the class, Pangea is going to continue to rift apart. First, we're going to open the Atlantic, the northern Atlantic. Then we're going to open the southern Atlantic. And then we're going to start breaking off Africa from India, Antarctica, Australia. These things are all going to kind of start breaking apart. So what in the very early stages of the age of the dinosaurs is one consistent, coherent supercontinent, eventually it gets kind of broken off into these little pieces. And obviously that has implications for dinosaur evolution. Initially, the whole populations across all of these continents are free to mix because they can freely walk back and forth. That's not going to be the case forever. Dinosaurs are found on all of the continents though, so they do make it into all these continents before they move apart. But what we'll see throughout the rest of the class is that they evolve kind of very differently in different locations. And so remember that what we talk about as dinosaurs don't all exist at the same time. They don't all exist at the same place. Dinosaurs vary in time and space, and which ones are found in different locations varies too, responding to the particular environment of that particular area at that particular time. So keep that in mind as we go. But these things are, obviously it doesn't look like something that you would want to mess with. It is a carnivorous, fast-moving predator, but it's much smaller than we think of as like something like a T-Rex or something like that. So these are the very basal members, not derived enough to qualify for either of the larger groups. Eodromaeus is one of the oldest things that's actually considered a true theropod at 231 million years ago. Its name means early runner or dawn runner. When you see this prefix here, Eo, we'll see that on quite a few different dinosaurs as we go through. Eo means like early, so this is an early kind of basal form. Sometimes you'll see proto, like we've talked about, we've mentioned protoceratops before, kind of like prototype. It's like the early basal ceratops, and so they kind of build off from there. Eodromaeus is a very early theropod, the earliest, the oldest confirmed anyway. What you see is, again, pretty small. We see here in the reconstructions, again, this debate about like, how feathered is it? This one is showing little kind of filamentous proto-feathers. This one is showing basically entirely bare scales. Also, you can see that this one really kind of doesn't show soft lips, whereas this one kind of does. Again, the soft parts like feathers and lips are not preserved in the fossil record. We work off of the skull, and so both of these are in the realm of possibility. We talked earlier about how feathered dinosaurs are, which ones are likely to be feathered. The smaller dinosaurs are more likely to be feathered to be able to retain their heat more. So I kind of favor the feathered interpretation here, but ultimately we just kind of don't know. But there are some implications to this, because if some of the basal theropods were feathered, some of the oldest known theropods were feathered, and some of the most advanced, most derived theropods, the birds, are definitely feathered. It's sort of, again, phylogenetic bracketing. It shows that theropods, all theropods in between, would probably be feathered. So that has implications for, again, is T-Rex feathered? Well, T-Rex would fall between Eodromeus and modern birds, both of which would then be feathered. And so it has implications. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that Tyrannosaurus rex would have kept those feathers. They might have been evolved away because of the larger body size. Again, we may never know. We do have scale imprints from T-Rex, which we saw before, so it probably wasn't entirely feathered, but these are the kind of things that we need to think about. But again, you see sharp teeth, very evolved for eating meat. It was a very swift runner, very active predator, could reach speeds of 20 plus miles per hour, faster than you. And again, it was found in this Ischigualasto formation in Argentina. Same thing as the Herrerasaurus. So they were kind of found together, very early, very basal dinosaurs. Another very basal dinosaur that we saw on that earlier cladogram is Tawa. So Tawa is named after the Pueblo Sun God, and obviously Pueblo Indians are from the western part of America, the Pueblo tribe. It's a basal Saurischian, possibly a basal Coelophysoid, which we'll talk about in just a second, but they are present in North America along with Coelophysis and Herrerasaurus. So it's kind of these more primitive basal members being present with a more derived member, and they're also still living alongside the Raulsuchians, those kind of walking crocodiles, and the phytosaurs, those kind of weird crocodiles with the nostrils up near the front that we talked about earlier in class. Those things are still in the picture, but this is evidence that dinosaurs at this point are kind of moving around the world. They probably started again in South America and Africa. They radiated outward from there to all of the different continents, but they're still relatively small at this point, because this is still the Triassic period. The Raulsuchians and the phytosaurs are the dominant carnivores and the dominant herbivores, and so they're competing with these animals, and they're being outcompeted in this case. So let's look at some of the theropods. So now we've talked about some of the basal theropods. Now these are going to be actually classified in here with theropods. We're going to talk about the Coelophysoidea and Dilophosaurus, Dilophosauroidea. And so this is what we're going to talk about for the rest of today. Next class, we're going to talk about the Herrerasauria, kind of going up this branch. Then we're going to talk about the Megalosauroidea, going up this branch. Then we're going to talk about the Carnosauria, going up this branch. And then we're going to talk about the Saurischians and the Maniraptora, the aves, the birds. We're going to talk about this branch. So this is kind of where we're heading. Then we're going to circle back and talk about Sauropodomorpha and Sauropods at the end of the module. So this is kind of just walking through. So let's talk about Coelophysoidea. So Coelophysoidea are the most basal theropods. And again, theropod means beast foot. You see the footprints here. They're very common throughout the Triassic. In fact, we see them in New York, which we'll talk about in just a second. But Coelophysoids are classified by, or I should say distinguished by, their long, slender bodies, their very, very narrow skull. Coelophysoid means hollow form. So they're also, the slender body is associated with these hollow pneumatized bones that we'll see in the later theropods and eventually is present in birds also. Another thing that we start seeing here is that we have the earliest confirmed furcula, the wishbone. So again, this is another piece of evidence that points to these theropod dinosaurs being the ancestors of modern birds. The hollow bones, the wishbone, and the similar structures, as we'll see as we get into further and further towards that bird line. Again, you can kind of see some different skull comparisons of different Coelophysoids, and obviously you see that they're somewhat different, but sharing a lot of different characteristics. We see some with kind of like more smaller teeth, and some with kind of larger, pointier teeth, but less of them. This is kind of heading towards a more carnivorous, hunting larger prey animals. This is the kind of dentition you would expect on something that's carnivorous, but hunting kind of smaller prey. So just keep that in mind, all the different things that we can learn from looking at just the teeth of the animal. And again, we generally don't have the behavior fossilized, so we have to look at the hard parts, the teeth, the bones, to try to figure this out. In some cases, we can look at the coprolites if we find them, but it's also kind of very hard to figure out which dinosaur those are associated with. So Coelophysoids are important to us because they're our dinosaur in New York. So New York during the Mesozoic, what was New York like during the Mesozoic? What was New York like in the time of the dinosaurs? The short answer is that we don't really know, because there's no Mesozoic rocks preserved in New York State, except for right down here in the very extreme southern parts of New York. So at this time, New York is a terrestrial environment. Terrestrial environments are very unlikely to preserve thick deposits of sediments. So the rocks were either not deposited, or it could be or they were eroded later. So remember, unlike some of the parts out west where we have a lot of dinosaur fossils, unlike some of the more famous locations, New York was glaciated. So we had 1 mile to 2 thick of ice above our heads just 20,000 years ago. And that ice removed a lot of the overlying rock strata. And those pages of history with all the information that was recorded in them have been sort of ripped out in New York State. And so if we want to know about the Mesozoic, what the Mesozoic was like, New York's not a very good place for it. New York is mostly Paleozoic rocks. So if we want to talk about life before the dinosaurs, things like trilobites and brachiopods and the older faunas of the Paleozoic that transition from the ocean onto land, those are the kind of things that we can find in New York State, but we have very little information about the Mesozoic, only down here in southern New York. So why? Well, this is where the Atlantic opened. So as Pangea was starting to break apart, these red areas on the map here are the rifts where it did open up. The Palisades along the Hudson in New York is a big injection of magma that solidified into an igneous rock along the Hudson River Gorge as this rift was opening. And this rift was opening and making a depression, and it filled in with sediment. And on that sediment, dinosaurs were frolicking along with their Raulsuchian, Aedosaur, and Phytosaur competitors. So these are some Coelophysids in the background here, very early dinosaurs. But dinosaurs were not alone in the Triassic. Remember, they were competing for space with these other, in many ways, better, more fit organisms. And so dinosaurs remained somewhat small, pretty low diversity, pretty low numbers overall in the environment. And they were kind of playing second fiddle to some of these other organisms. But if we look at Coelophysis boweri, this is the actual specimen, the actual kind of dinosaur that leaves its prints in New York in the red beds. So the red beds are often kind of a reddish tint. They're rusted, which implies that they were deposited on land where the iron minerals could oxidize or rust. But yeah, Coelophysis is New York State's official dinosaur, official state dinosaur. And very classic, you see the elongated head here. You see the teeth here, this very slender body. Again, it means hollow form. Very often, Coelophysis are found in kind of communal beds where there's multiple specimens found in one place, which indicates that Coelophysis may have hung out in groups. They may have hunted in packs, or it might have been just a social group that might have gathered for mating or something like that and then dispersed. But there's at least some evidence that they had some social gatherings, because there are often mass burials of them found where a lot of them died in the same location at the same time, which means they were together. Now, whether they were like active pack hunters, they're able to coordinate and communicate like a lot of modern pack hunters, we don't know. But if you look at the relative size of their brain case versus their body size, they probably weren't the world's smartest organisms. And so that level of communication was probably not in the cards, but it's interesting to ask that question. But again, we see these, the classic kind of three-toed theropod footprints here, and you see these all over in the Triassic and some actually in New York. So there are some evidence of dinosaurs in New York, but it's scattered and it's very limited to just extremely southern New York. Around Oswego, around Buffalo, around Rochester, you're not going to find this. You're going to be looking at Paleozoic stuff. If you go to the Adirondacks, you're going to be looking at Precambrian stuff. So only in a very restricted environment can you find this stuff. So let's keep on going. So Camposaurus, Camp's lizard, is one of the older known theropods. It's a coelophysid, so it's one of these coelophysid dinosaurs. It's got a few more derived characteristics, so it's more like some of the more advanced theropods that come later. But it's so similar to Coelophysis itself that it was originally classified as Coelophysis, and it wasn't recognized that it was different. The reconstruction of Camposaurus is pretty poor. There's not a lot of fossil material. So again, this is a good example of we don't have a lot of specimens. It's unlikely for anything to be fossilized. So if you remember that rule of thumb that 1 in a billion bones would end up being fossilized, it's very unlikely that anything gets fossilized. So the fact that we have any fossil record is sort of amazing. And so there's going to be problems. There's going to be gaps. There's going to be specimens that are fragmentary. There's going to be species that we may never even know about because they weren't preserved. So Camposaurus is one of these where we don't have a lot of material. And when we're trying to reconstruct from just a couple different bones, it makes the reconstruction much more difficult. But again, what you see is this trend where these things are around in the Triassic with the Raulsuchians, with the Phytosaurs, with all these other large predators. And so they're being outcompeted. And so they're staying small, they're staying relatively not diverse, relatively low in numbers. But then at the end of the Triassic, there's that big mass extinction that we talked about earlier. The Raulsuchians go extinct, the walking crocodiles, they go extinct. We didn't talk about the Ornithosuchidae, they go extinct. Eodrosaurs, we mentioned briefly, they go extinct. And Phytosaurs, they go extinct. This line of the reptiles here ends up splitting off earlier, splitting off to the pterosaurs, which we talked about earlier, and the dinosaurs, which obviously we're talking about now. And then this line, the crocodilomorphs, persists into today, the modern crocodiles and alligators and gharials and all those sorts of things. And then there's the lepidosaurs, the scaly reptiles, snakes and lizards, and also the ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and the mosasaurs branched off of there as well. And so those continue on into the Mesozoic. Ichthyosaurs don't make it to the present day, neither do pterosaurs, and only birds make it in the form of dinosaurs. But this was a big major event for the dinosaurs. This competition here was out of the way, and now dinosaurs can start growing large. So again, you've seen this slide before, but in the Triassic, the dinosaurs are relatively limited in their size and diversity. They're pretty small, and there's not many of them. Coelophysis is pretty small. Even the larger Herrerasaurus is fairly small. This is something that it's kind of like human-ish size, maybe a little bit bigger. It's not the massive kind of things that we think about as dinosaurs later on, although even later on, there's a lot of diversity in the shapes and sizes, but this is an early sauropod, which we'll talk about in the next, towards the end of the module. But this is one of the bigger dinosaurs around, and you see that compared to some of the later forms, it's really not that big. There's not that many, they're not that big. This is the pattern that we see in the Triassic until that end Triassic extinction wipes out the competition. And then we start seeing all these different forms and this dramatic increase in size. The arms race is truly on. There's this competition between predator and prey. Body size is increasing, and they're exploiting all of these different niches. And dinosaurs really start to inherit the Earth in the Jurassic. So one of the earlier examples of this, once we've crossed that boundary into the Jurassic, is the Dilophosauridae. So the Dilophosauridae are the first kind of really large, truly apex predator dinosaurs. The Raulsuchians are out of the way. The Phytosaurs are out of the way. The Eodromaeus are out of the way. Dinosaurs have inherited the Earth after the end Triassic mass extinction, and the Dilophosauridae are the first ones that are kind of filling that large predator niche. Dinosaurs have taken over. How do we know that they're starting to be these massive predators? Well, compared to Coelophysis and the Coelophysids, the Dilophosauridae have much fewer teeth, and their teeth are also much larger. And you also start to see the serrations and the recurve, the curve backwards. These are special adaptations for eating meat. They're moving towards larger prey. They're eating other dinosaurs. This is kind of the first thing where other dinosaurs are on the menu. These are apex predators. They're going to eat anything that comes along, whereas Coelophysis were a little bit more opportunistic, and because of the limited size and limited dentition, really. But you see Dracovenator, which is a member of Dilophosauridae. This is something that you would start being very scared of if you saw it, and we would definitely be on the menu if we were around for this thing. So obviously one of the members of Dilophosauridae is Dilophosaurus itself, and this is one of the weird examples from Jurassic Park where the actual animal is actually scarier and much more intimidating than the version that we saw on the screen. So this is, I forget what his name was, Nedry, I think, Newman from Seinfeld. He kind of falls down in the mud, slips in the mud, and he encounters this little kind of dog-sized critter, and it kind of makes these cute little squeak noises at him. This is what Dilophosaurus was actually like. Dilophosaurus was much larger. It still had the prominent head crest, so they got that part right. Was it a display structure? Probably. So the fact that they kind of had Dilophosaurus being very bright colored was probably true if it's a display structure. But this kind of neck frill here, there's no evidence of that neck frill, especially the way that it kind of flares out like that. There's also no evidence that they were able to spit venom or that they had venom or any access to venom at all. So there's no evidence of this from the fossil record. I'm not entirely sure where this came from, but can we rule it out entirely? Well, this frill is made out of soft tissue. There are probably dinosaurs that had very ornate soft tissue or feather displays that we are not aware of because they're not preserved in the fossil record. So we might be kind of underrepresenting how ornate and elaborate and display-oriented dinosaurs were. Remember, they were very visual creatures. Their eyesight was very good. Their ability to discriminate color was very good. They probably used color and display quite a lot. So this is not entirely outside the realm of possibility, but it's unlikely, and there is no evidence for it, no direct evidence. Another cool thing about Dilophosaurus is that it showed sexual dimorphism. And when we think about sexual dimorphism in mammals, it's usually the males that are larger and a little bit more robust, larger skeletons, more musculature. In Dilophosaurus, it's the females that are larger. And this is something that we often see, and we see today quite frequently in birds as well. But again, it's I don't know why they took this direction with the Dilophosaurus in particular. Dilophosaurus, they usually go for like the dramatic impact. If anything, they make the dinosaur larger than it actually was and scarier than it actually was. And in this case, they kind of shrank it down and made it friendlier, although the venom, I think, probably adds a little bit of issue. So anyway, that's Dilophosaurus. I don't want to dwell too much on Jurassic Park. I know some of you probably haven't seen it, but if you're taking dinosaurs class, you probably did, might be why you're taking this class. So I do want to mention it in passing so that you can see like some of the misconceptions that grow up around there and some of these pop culture references. There's usually a seed of truth. In this case, I'm not sure what that seed was. So moving on into the early Jurassic, we have these Dilophosaurids. They're starting to take over, but there's a point where these basal theropods, and on the other side of the Saurischia tree, the prosauropods, they go extinct. Not entirely sure why. So was it some environmental change, or were they just being outcompeted by some of these more derived, more specialized, more advanced members that are starting to arise? So this is kind of what things looked like early on. Sort of smaller coelophysids, the Platysaurus, sort of a medium-sized herbivore. Once they're out of the way, it clears the way for this kind of vast increase in size, vast increase in diversity. We start seeing the Carnosaurs come on the scene. We start seeing Stegosaurs come on the scene, being the dominant herbivores. So we start seeing these new body plans. We start seeing this increase in body size, and we just kind of see that trend continue throughout the Jurassic. And so these are the kind of trends that we'll be talking about going forward in the class. And there's not a lot of material on this for today, so that's all I've got. And that's the last slide, the disclaimer. I hope you've enjoyed that, and goodbye.